Welcome to Downey High School Online, home of the virtual Vikings. Hope you guys are having a great day so far. My name is Mr. Acevedo, and we're going to be going over the Articles of Confederation. Now, before we go over the articles, we're just going to have a quick review on what you should be learning in your classes. So, King George III's government is getting oppressive towards the colonists, and this all stems from the French and Indian War. And this was a war between England and France over North American territory that happened in the colonies. Now, because they happened in the colonies, England thinks that the colonies should be the ones to pay for them. And so with that, they create a series of acts and taxes that puts a lot of stress on the colonists. And so for the colonists, this causes them to struggle, and they openly rebel. And on July 4th, 1776, the colonists finally declared their freedom. But the question that we got to ask is, now what? Now that we declared our freedom and the United States, or the colonies, are looking like they're going to win this war, what do we do now? And so the colonists finally decide that we have to establish a government, and they create the Articles of Confederation. So the Articles of Confederation is kind of like the Constitution. It was the first government and the first document to say how the United States was going to govern itself. So this was our very, very first form of government. This was adopted around mid-Revolutionary War in 1781, when the United States realized, actually, we could win. It actually became a reality that the colonists were going to win, and this was something that no one has ever seen before. It'd be similar to a kindergartner going up to a high schooler and asking if they wanted to fight, because a lot of people thought the United States was going to lose. And so now that they're going to win, how are we going to govern ourselves? Well, their very first of attempt at government was very, very poor. And the reason why is because everyone was scared to create a government that had too much power. And because they dealt with the king that had too much power, this led them to create a very weak government. And so this government only composed of a Congress, which was to make laws. There was no executive branch and no judicial branch. So if a state didn't want to follow a law, they had no one to enforce them to follow the law. And if a state broke the law, there was no one to judge them on their punishment. On top of that, there was no power to tax. So the Articles of Confederation did not allow the federal government to tax anybody. So then they had no power. And with no money, they had no power to raise an army, because soldiers cost money. You have to feed them, you have to house them, you have to pay for weaponry. So all of that costs money that they don't have. And on top of that, they could not regulate trade or currency. So the federal government did not have their own currency, their own money. So the dollar didn't exist yet. Each state had their own form of currency. Now, this created problems because everybody has to agree on the worth of a dollar. For us, it's just a paper, but that paper means something to us. That's why it's meaningful. But if you just print more paper money and it's not worth anything, then it causes inflation. So each state had their own form of currency. And some colonies, some states had more wealth than others. So a Massachusetts dollar might be worth more than a Virginian dollar. So if you were living somewhere in between those colonies, you would probably want to get paid in Massachusetts money because it's worth more. All that is going to create problems. On top of that, there are some political weaknesses, such as with the unicameral Congress. Later on, we're going to talk about bicameral, which is a Congress that we have today. But basically, unicameral means one house. And so with one house, each state only had one vote, regardless of size. So we're in a democracy, and what we try to do is have a representative democracy where, depending on the population, that's how many votes you have. But in the Articles of Confederation, it didn't matter if this state had more people living in it than this state. Everybody had one vote. So there wasn't an equal say on what laws should be laws. Secondly, in order to change or amend the Constitution, all states had to agree. So an amendment, just a fancy word for a change to a legal document. If they wanted to change anything in the Articles of Confederation, all 13 states had to agree that they should change it. Now, with that, each state had to retain its freedom to rule, and they could do whatever they want. So if they did make a change where all 13 states agreed, one state could change their mind and say, we don't want to follow that no more, and they couldn't do anything about it. The other states would have to let them do what they want because they had their right to maintain their freedom. So this caused a host of problems, but one problem in particular that had made them change their mind was a rebellion called Shays Rebellion. So Shays Rebellion starts off with a group of farmers in Massachusetts. These farmers felt like they were getting taxed unfairly by the Massachusetts government. So if you think back to a couple years earlier with the American Revolution, the whole reason the revolution happened was because the colonists were feeling like they were getting taxed unfairly. So it's happening again, and the colonists thought, well, we better start a revolution, and we're going to rebel against the state of Massachusetts. And this rebellion was led by a man named Daniel Shays. So Daniel Shays leads 1,200 farmers to the Massachusetts State Army so that they could overthrow the state government. So Massachusetts has no idea what they're going to do, and they go to the federal government for help. But the federal government has no money, and they have no troops. There's no way that they could stop this rebellion. Well, the governor of Massachusetts has to use his own money to hire a private militia, and eventually the rebellion was put down. And this caused worry for the rest of the colonies. So what are we going to do if this happens again? So we have to talk about, what is the goal of school? Well, the goal of school is to learn. And who helps you the most with learning? That's going to be your teacher. And your teacher is going to decide how you're going to learn, what is the best way for you to learn, and go over the curriculum with you. Now, you have to think about teaching styles. Well, if you have a lazy teacher, chances are that they really don't care what you do. There might be more lenient. They might let the troublemakers get away with more stuff. And so with that, that teacher is not going to allow you to learn. But then you might also have a very strict teacher. And a strict teacher might be on you to get your work done. However, you don't feel comfortable enough to learn because you're so scared of getting yelled at. Maybe you're scared of being criticized. So all of these, they're not going to work. You kind of need a teacher who's going to be in the middle. One who's going to hold you accountable, but still make you feel comfortable enough to learn. We got to think about government types that we talked. We talked first about King George and how his government was very, very oppressive, very strict. And then we had the Articles of Confederation, who were very, very loose and let the states and colonies do what they wanted. Both of those governments aren't good governments, and they both had faults. Now we got to talk about is, what is the goal of the United States? Well, the goal of the United States government is to govern the people, but not to oppress them, but still maintain control. So if a rebellion happens, they can put that down. Well, in 1789, the Constitution replaced the Articles of Confederation. The Constitution is still the government that we use today. And so the Constitution is based off the separation of powers. We want a government who can still maintain control, but not be oppressive. And the best way we can do that is to give power to certain branches of government, but limit their power, meaning only give them a certain task and also be able to watch over each other. And so we created 3 separate branches of government. You have the legislative branch, who makes laws, executive branch, who enforces the laws, and you have the judicial branch. Those are the judges and the court system that judges the laws. This allows us to separate our power and not have an oppressive government, but still have a government that can get things done. You're going to be going over that a little bit later in the course. That's it for me. Thank you guys so much.